welcome to this episode of the Movement Prescription podcast, hosted by 3 GPs with an interest in getting our patients moving. I'm Suzy Scarlett, a GP in Edinburgh, and I'll be today's host, following on from Callum's reflections on his time with the Richmond Fellowship and how our colleagues are integrating physical activity into modern-day healthcare internationally. Closer to home, in this episode, I'll explore how nature can be so powerful for our health. I've had the privilege of chatting with Professor William Bird, a pioneer of nature prescribing, who's recently taken on a role at Parliament to help scale up his career application of nature and physical activity in healthcare. And as a contrast to this, I'm also interviewing writer and photographer Anna Deacon, who is on a one-woman mission to make nature popular again. Anna, I don't know if that's a fair comment to make, but it's so lovely to have you today here to talk about your experiences and what you refer to as the wild fix, which is also the title of your new book.
Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful thing to chat about this.
Yeah, you've been passionate about this for years, Anna. And I've sort of followed you from your wild swimming books and then discovered your tree book. How on earth did you end up writing about nature?
Well, it started off actually as a photographic project. I was quite burnt out with my work and swimming a lot in the sea in Edinburgh. And on that journey, sort of meeting some really interesting people that perhaps I might have not crossed paths with in my usual life. And as I was chatting to them in the sea, I just thought, the light's hitting them beautifully, or, there was something that just made me want to take a portrait. So I started sort of just saying, well, perhaps we could have a chat and I can take a photograph of you, and then I could find out why you're swimming, and then maybe I can do something with that. And the powerful stories that came out of those conversations with us both in the water and me taking a portrait, stories of people who were coming to the water with grief, with long-term pain problems, and also just lots of stress, depression, loneliness. The stories were extraordinary and people were very open to sharing them. So I started an Instagram page to put the stories and the photographs together. And that's kind of where this began. But in that time, I got introduced to Vicky Allen, who's a writer for the Herald newspaper, who also had just started wild swimming and was interested in it. And this mutual friend just said, well, I think you two should meet and make this into a book. And actually, within a year of us, that first meeting, the book was out, Taking the Plunge. And it really was a book where we kind of explored people's connection to wild swimming, but also nature in general, and their sort of journeys through mental health and physical health and well-being. So that's kind of the premise of it. And then the books just carried on from there. And through it, we did a book about trees as well, about people's connection directly with trees and specific trees or pieces of woodland and what it meant to them as a person. So we're really telling people's stories, but through the kind of prism of nature, if you like. But through doing all of this, I'm meeting all these incredible experts who are teaching us all these amazing things about what nature's doing for our bodies. So my big mission really, especially through lockdown, was to just explore this more. And I could see the benefits it was having on me. But what I wanted to find out was is this the case for everybody? What is it actually doing to us? What are all the different things we can do and how? And, so I started really diving into the science about 5 years ago. And I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. So this was not an easy thing to do. I've read more of the scientific papers than I can throw a stick at. But I've really enjoyed the process and then trying to distill what I've learned down into something that's really accessible and easy for anybody, sort of bite-sized chunks of why this is good for you, how to do it, and, just hopefully inspiring people to get started.
I absolutely love that because it's so important to understand the why before you can do the how. But there's a lot of the why out there and not so much of the how. And I love how you sort of bring this out in your books and like you said, making this accessible to such a wide such a broad sort of category of people, and sort of bringing it to the masses in a very different way than a healthcare professional might do that. I just want to sort of go back a little bit. You said that you were experiencing burnout. So I think from my understanding, and I didn't obviously know you then, but I know you now, which is lovely. But it couldn't be further from the sort of the calm and the serene world that you now seek out. You're in a sort of a high-flying career in media and music and entertainment in big cities and places like that. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, so I started working at age of 18 in London in the music business, and it was, hard to get into in those days. I was making the tea and learning on the job and supporting myself with basically 2 other jobs in order to meet the rent. And it was exciting. It was a really exciting time to be in that world. And my husband also worked in that world in the film business, and we were having a great time. I mean, we were in the city in London. We were going to parties. We were working all the hours. It was just an all-encompassing lifestyle. But the great thing for me was that my parents lived in the Highlands of Scotland. So my antidote to this kind of completely wonderfully fun, but very intense and chaotic world that I was working in, of music festivals and concerts, and it was just a 24-hour job, really. It was your whole life. But then I could jump on the sleeper train on a Friday night after work and wake up in King Eustace, where my parents lived, and just get off the train and just exhale and just be in the forests and the glens and the rivers and the places that were my home, really, the places that have always been where I return to when I need to find myself. So, even through all of that time, I had this connection back, and this was always my, the real heart of who I am. And then from, having children and dialing down that lifestyle, going more into photography and things like that, it was also a way of managing my kind of burnout cycles. As someone with ADHD, I now understand why it's happening. So I'm able to manage myself more. But it's been a long time of just going at things full pelt and then getting ill and not being able to function and then having to rebuild myself differently. And I've been doing that for many years. And I think a lot of this has been almost a return to the heart of who I really am and what I really love, which is being outdoors and being in nature. And it's been really lovely to kind of find that again and then also share it with other people.
And I think that's what you're doing so beautifully, is sharing that with other people and seeing that through, an evidence-based lens, which is what, I see the lifestyle medicine approach is about trying to share with people this evidence-based approach to health that doesn't need to be overly medically complex. One of the questions actually that I asked William Bird was, should we be medicalizing nature?
Ooh, well, that's a difficult one because I'm not a medical professional in any way. What I can say is, from what I've read, I love the fact that it's coming together. I don't think we should be medicalizing it, but I think also a lot of people that I'm speaking to are not aware of the medical benefits of being in nature. And it's almost like there's 2 very separate things. You go to the doctor about illnesses, but actually a lot of the ways that we can help prevent illnesses are, by living a different kind of lifestyle, potentially. And I think, hopefully, the fact that it's becoming something that doctors are talking about more is something that also potentially validates it for people as an option, as something that they potentially should be doing. It's not just a nice thing to do on a weekend, go for a walk in a park, but actually my doctor's telling me this is really good for me and this is why it's really good for me. So I think it's good because I think it potentially pushes people into it who maybe weren't thinking it would be that good for them, really, without what's the evidence for this? Why is this going to help my my blood pressure or whatever the problem might be, or how can this help with my mood? But then I'm also seeing things like this just missed my book deadline, which I'm a bit gutted about, but that King's Hospital have just opened this incredible rooftop intensive care unit for their patients, just because they were saying that it's so important for people to have that connection with with nature and with the outside world, especially when they've been for months on end just inside with the bright lights of a hospital and the beeps and all the unnatural sounds and the straight lines and all of the things that go against what we need as humans, which is the messy, tangly world of nature that our bodies really require access to that. And so the fact that they've done that is incredible. And I love the fact that this is becoming more of a topic that patients are hearing and that people are hearing. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more about the outdoor ICU. And I think it's just, I remember doing my acute medical training I did before general practice, and you'd be inside under unnatural light for 12 hours, and when you finally emerged, it was just so nice to be outdoors in the fresh air. It was usually dark by the time you came out, especially living in Scotland, especially in the winter, in the winter months. But actually, I sent you an article yesterday about UK Biobank data, which has shown, the importance of sunlight, even, hasn't it?
It's incredible. I mean, there's so much coming out of this of the research on circadian rhythms and sunlight, and also the light at different times of day. And you hear so much about this, but actually, the more I read into it, the more understanding I had of why it's so important to get the right light at the right times, and also the problems with your circadian rhythm going out of sync can be really quite intense. So I think just trying to help show people just like really simple things like getting that morning light helps set your body up for the day and send the right signals at the right time to digest your food, when to help you go to sleep at night. And it doesn't necessarily feel like something like going for a morning walk might help you sleep better that night. But actually, when you look at why, I think that helps people kind of understand. But also, things like having the low lights in the evening, just side lamps, not having, even on a phone, you can change the color of the background of the phone so that you're not getting that blue light in the evening. But also knowing that at lunchtime, going out for a walk during that sort of blue light period in the middle of the day, it is going to wake you up, and help prevent that afternoon slump. So it's been really interesting finding out how much different light affects us on many different levels, but how to very easily sort of change your pattern a little bit to help with that.
In terms of sunlight, it was interesting. I bumped into a well-known professor of dermatology in Edinburgh who was just talking about how he feels that dermatologists have actually done the greater public a disservice because we've forgotten the balance, the importance of sunlight, in our sort of fear of melanoma, which is a serious skin cancer. We see more and more of that. But I guess it just has to be, we have to focus on the early morning sunlight. And I guess in Scotland, we don't have quite so much of the dangerous UV rays that they have elsewhere. So I guess as we were discussing, balance is so important, yet so hard to achieve. But I think it's really good that we are now talking about the importance of sunlight again. And you talk there about the circadian rhythm as well, which I think is one of my favorite things actually in sort of lifestyle medicine and understanding the science behind the patterns in our bodies. But I've got a question for you, Anna. Is all outside time equal, or do some places have bigger benefits than others?
Oh, well, I couldn't give you a definitive answer here. I think any is better than none. And I think if you can even looking at pictures of nature has a measurable effect on your well-being. So if we start from there and build up, I think you can find that the longer you spend in nature, and probably the more diverse the nature, the better it is, I would suppose. But I think honestly that you can get so many benefits just from sitting in a garden, that what I'm really keen to do is try and say to people, you don't have to go and climb a Monroe or be in a really remote location to get the benefits of nature. You can get the benefits of nature in your garden, or looking out of your window, or walking in a park, or being in a city centre and looking at a tree, or looking up at the clouds from an office window. You don't have to change too much to get the benefits. However, I do think that there are benefits to being around trees, particular trees. There's a lot of benefits to being in or near water. So, if you can bring those elements in, brilliant, all the better. But it's not necessary, I would say. So I think you probably feel more calm the quieter it is, and the more, serene the atmosphere and the place around you. But if all you can look at is a beautiful crop of wildflowers in the middle of a roundabout, then that is better than nothing. So, yeah.
I had a registrar in one of my teaching groups recently, and I forget how it came up. I think we were talking about humanities in medicine, which is I think most of them were a little bit closed-minded before that session. But actually, I asked them all to bring along something which they felt would be relevant to that session. And she brought a photograph of the window that she created in the windowless room, because their GP practice had expanded so much. She was put into this windowless room. And she couldn't cope with this because she needed some outdoor space or some way of connecting with the outdoor world. So she went along to just a local home store and bought a multi-aperture photo frame and a window handle. And she put a lovely photograph of nature behind it. And so it transformed this windowless room into something. Yes, she didn't have any natural light, which is miserable. But she said that she felt better, and lots of the patients commented on it. So I guess you can start with something being better than nothing and then work up from there.
Yeah, I think that's very much, as I said, I want people to feel like it's not something they had to change everything all at once, because that can be too overwhelming. It's just about tiny baby steps and understanding that something is better than nothing always, In your book, you said that hugging trees is not just woo-woo, and you mentioned there the sort of the science behind the trees. Could you tell us a bit more about that? What have you learned? Well, there's so many parts to it. I've been reading a lot about forest bathing and how the Japanese government brought it in the 1980s as a kind of antidote to the kind of city life and the burnout that was happening amongst their sort of workforce. And they brought in this forest bathing, and they've been doing so many studies on it since, in all kinds of different ways. And it's really interesting from a couple of different viewpoints. One is that the trees are emitting phytoncides, which are incredible kind of antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and we do absorb them. And they've done these trials where they've actually pumped them into sterile hotel rooms. So people are still getting the benefits of the phytoncides, even if they're not in a forest, through a diffuser, the essential oils. And then they had a control group in another sterile room who didn't have it, and the sleep was measurably different. And there's lots of trials like that have been done measuring phytoncides. So obviously it's great to experience that in a forest. But also the eye is naturally drawn to green. We see more colours of green than any other colour. It's a calming colour to us as humans, which is why green rooms, which is where people go before they go in on TV or on the theatre, or if they're playing a live show, you go in a green room, but they're never normally green. But the green room was invented as a calming place. And, the eyes are more relaxed when we're in nature. We are able to, calm our nervous system down, just the sounds of the birds in the trees and the wind in the trees. And also I think just being in a forest and just allowing yourself to slow down and be mindful of what's around you, which is so much a part of forest bathing, is just observing what's around you and just seeing it. You don't have to do anything, but just being aware of the smells, the sounds, and where you are in the world. So there's those parts of it, but also there's an element of grounding. If you're hugging a tree and you're kind of connecting in to the earth, through the current of the earth, by touching with your bare hands or bare feet on the floor. So there's so much to it as from a sort of scientific standpoint. There's so many studies showing why it's good for us. But, I think we all know that we feel better when we go into nature, and actually sometimes weirdly hugging a tree actually does feel like, a really nice thing to do. I don't know. Those who haven't tried it, just give it a try. It's actually really nice.
So
I was just quite keen to look at why is it that we feel good when we go in a forest? What is it about hugging trees or forest bathing that makes us feel good? And so, yeah, the idea was to try and just sort of look into the research and then show people how to kind of practically do that.
And I guess if you don't have a forest nearby, what can you do? Is it enough to get some houseplants, or I don't know, where do you start? Where do people in urban environments who don't have this access? We're so lucky to live in this beautiful city that is, there's always green spaces accessible. And we're talking in August, and there's been this drought up and down the country and all these horrendous forest fires. So, some of the green spaces will have been obliterated recently, which is I mean, I don't know if you've had much to do with that, or thoughts on the disasters that we're seeing. How on earth can we help protect these green spaces that we have?
I know. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the Cairngorms, and I was up there when the wildfires were really raging, and it was so shocking to see. And just, the fire that was in, I think it was the Peak District, that got set off by some teenagers letting off a firework into the dry grass. I mean, it was awful, and it was inconsiderate. But I can also see that these were young people that perhaps weren't aware of the impact that this action could have. And I think so much of this is about awareness and about understanding, why we don't light fires at this time, and that bottles left discarded can catch fire. And I think it's like so much of it's about education and about understanding, how precious these environments are. And hopefully the more time people kind of understand more about them, the more they want to protect them, and the more they want to to look after what we have. But it happens every single year. There's something. It's like the sun comes out and people go wild camping and they leave their stuff everywhere, and someone else has to clear it up. And it's like, I see this over and over every single year. And, I guess we all just have to do our part. And if we see litter and we're out and about somewhere that's dry and has the potential for a fire, if we can pick it up and take it with us, great. If there's a discarded bottle or anything that might potentially catch fire, or report it if you see a fire. But it was truly heartbreaking to see the scale of it driving through near Nethy Bridge, and just being able to see the smoke and smell the smoke from quite a distance away, and just see the burn line. And then just also hearing how deep into the peat the fire had got. So it was really hard to get it out. It's still going. It's not over yet. And such precious landscape,
Although we've had some rain. I don't know if that's been the same elsewhere, really quite heavy rain. Yesterday I was actually thinking of you, Anna, as I was walking past an urban puddle, and I got down on my sort of hands and knees and took a little video of the beauty of the raindrops in the urban puddle. I think my neighbours thought I'd gone absolutely mental, but I was having a moment.
I've often done stuff like that, sitting in an Asda car park, taking photographs of the raindrops on the window. I think the thing is once you start looking for beauty in nature, you start seeing it. And it's like this polyvagal theory that Deb Danner came up with, this concept of glimmers. And I absolutely love this, because glimmers are the opposite of triggers. And so, when you're triggered by something and it kind of provokes a kind of fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response, a kind of panic, Maybe it's a loud bang or something that a smell even that takes you to a place that makes you feel afraid or, anxious. But the idea that the glimmer is the absolute opposite of that. A glimmer is something that makes you feel safe. It makes you feel joyful, and it kind of provokes that parasympathetic nervous system response. It makes you feel calm. And I think that we can find so many of these glimmers in nature. And what she was saying was the more you look, the more you see. And I've absolutely found this to be the case myself. And actually the times where I've really struggled over the last 5 years or so, since I learned about that, I force myself to go out on a glimmer hunting walk when I'm going out to purposely seek beauty in nature. And I tell you, some days, especially in Scotland, when it's dark and it's raining and rain is sideways, and I'm going out on those days and I'm looking to find something that's beautiful and take a photograph of it, because then I can sort of almost remind myself like there is beauty always. You have to sometimes look a bit harder. And on the really toughest days, we've had a couple of family bereavements this year and it's been bleak. And on those days, I know to lean into nature more than ever. And it's those days where you just want to lie in your bed and block out the world. And I know, that doesn't do anything for me. The best thing I need to do is actually just put on a coat and just go outside and look for that, whether it's bouncing raindrops in a puddle, or it's the shadow from leaves on the pavement, or it's a beautiful wildflower meadow, or it's the big crashing waves. There's always something that you can find, but you have to sometimes make yourself look.
Yeah, it's taking that first step, isn't it? And I know I've got loads more questions that I planned to ask you, but as always, we've spoken and spoken. And I think to sort of bring this all together, when I was talking to William Bird, who we'll hear speak next, he talks about the importance of the 3 Ps, the people, the purpose, and the place. I think when it comes to getting outdoors, and you've just described that so beautifully. If you've got a purpose and that purpose is for you going and finding a glimmer, or sometimes it's the accountability as well, isn't it, of going out. You're less likely to do it if it's just you thinking, I might go for a walk today. But if you've arranged to meet your friend at 10, you're jolly well going to do it. Or if your dog's crossing its legs because it needs to go out for a pee, then you can't not do that either. And I guess it's about the importance of having that permission to do that. But and if you were to give the people that tune into the Movement Prescription podcast, and we focus mainly on nature and getting outdoors, but as a byproduct of that, people will be moving in order to get themselves to the places that they find beautiful nature. This is not exercise. This is physical activity by accident sometimes. Yeah. What would be your sort of take-home message to healthcare professionals from all the research that you've done? What do you feel that healthcare professionals maybe need to know or think about?
I think that probably what I think is the greatest barrier to all of this is people thinking it's too hard. I need to do this huge thing in order to get these benefits. And I think the thing that I keep saying all the way through this, and I really advocate for this, is that everyone can do it, and it's free, and it doesn't need to be huge. It could be a pot plant. It could be looking out of your window at the clouds. It doesn't have to be a great big adventure that takes all day, and you don't have to set aside that time to just begin to dip your toe into observing nature. But when you understand actually what it's doing for you, as well as something that you enjoy just doing for fun, when you actually see the benefits, and I think if we could have more of that in a kind of prescription way. I mean, the NHS Scotland are doing nature prescriptions, and I think it's wonderful. And it's like the response has been brilliant to these leaflets and things like that. And sometimes it just takes someone to inspire you to do something. So it might be, why don't you go on a glimmer walk? Someone who's really struggling with something. You don't have to walk very far, but just look for a different color of the rainbow, and don't come home until you've found something red, yellow, green, and just do it like that. Just give someone like a little little mission. And I think sometimes just having a little mission and a small win helps you to then bring more in. But if it feels too hard, I think you give up, So I think that's how I would just say if people can start with something tiny, a tiny adjustment, and then hopefully they'll see the benefits and build up from there.
So go get your wild fixes, everyone. Anna, it's been so lovely to chat with you. And thank you so much for coming on the Movement Prescription podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So from the author of books on wild fixes to co-author of the textbook on nature and public health. And since recording with William Bird, he's taken on a new role with the Cabinet Office on Neighbourhood Health. Thank you so much for joining us for this part of the podcast on nature on prescription, or whatever we end up calling this. But it is an absolute delight to have Dr. William Bird with us today, who has written the textbook on nature and public health, but I think actually is so passionate about the need for nature in the health industry. And I just wanted to invite you along, William, and thank you for coming today.
Suzy, thank you. Great pleasure. As I always love talking about this. It's something which is really close to my heart, but it's also something very professionally I believe is important. So lovely to be here.
Thank you. So you are a well-known GP to many of us and honorary professor with the University of Exeter, I understand, amongst many other things. Could you tell us a little bit about how on earth you arrived at this and ended up being such a wonderful, trusted voice on nature, on prescription?
I'm not sure about the trusted voice, but a voice might be okay. But it is a life history, really. And I think probably because my dad was a doctor, GP, and my mother was a naturalist. So probably there was a couple of genes that kind of crossed over there and came to me. So I'd had that kind of both inputs from my parents. Was nature was very important. And when I became a GP at Sonning Common, back in, I hate to even say this, 1991, when I first started in general practice, I was given the kind of the junior role. You've got the diabetes clinic, and the person who had it last, very happy to hand it over. It wasn't very much nurse-led then. You actually had to know what you were talking about as a GP, whereas now, of course, you've got amazing nurses doing a lot of the work and understanding it. So they, as you know, all the patients move around. And when they came to me, we talked about physical activity, and they kind of said, I do a bit, doc, but next time I'll do better. And it was always that same old, too expensive, not able to get the weather right, not able to have time to go out. And I went for a walk, and it was a beautiful July evening. And of course, old-fashioned GPs, we knew where everyone lived. I knew exactly where those patients with diabetes were. And as I went past, I kind of peered into their, not quite badly, but looked into their living room, seeing the television on. It was a beautiful day. And I thought, hang on a sec, I'm out here in this beautiful day walking, and you're all indoors moaning about the fact that the weather's bad all the time, and it's not, it's beautiful. So what's stopping it? So we got them into Village Hall and got about 100 patients with diabetes into a Village Hall. And I said, look, what's stopping you from exercising? And it all came out that the women found it a little bit scary to be on their own, and the men were a bit more worried about being lost, and also not being able to climb over the stiles, which were quite high, some of them. So we said, well, lead walks. And that started off for health walks. And that's how I started the health walks back in 1996. And then we've realized that nature was the biggest draw, as well as community. So they talked to each other. That was huge. And then they said, it's so lovely to be outdoors. I never go to this place. And this is literally 100 yards from where they lived, and they weren't going to it. So started the Green Gym fairly soon after, which is conservation work. And we realized that nature was playing a huge part. And I got a lot more interested. And actually Natural England, which was a countryside commission, then helped sponsor and fund the health walks. But they wanted to know a bit more about the connection. And as I started looking at research, I thought, this is extraordinary. There's loads of research here about nature and health. And so it kind of led on to me joining Natural England when it first formed as their health lead. And I set up all the health programs for Natural England, including green social prescribing, which was very embryonic then. I like to think we were starting out in the Green Gym. And it kind of meant that I realized that when you're looking at people, there are three things. It's a people, purpose, and place. So the people connect with each other. That's the people bit. Having a purpose, doing outdoors, etc. But the place was so important. And that connection to nature seemed to both help people connect with each other, and it also helped them feel relaxed and de-stressed. And kind of that's how the story started. That got me into the nature part, and then the academic bit came a bit later with a really good friend. We kind of edited a book, and I'm still talking about it.
That's absolutely brilliant. So this all came from your childhood, actually, I guess, your own childhood experiences. You mentioned your mum was did you say a naturalist?
Yeah, not a naturalist, a naturalist, yeah. She may have been, I don't know. But no, she was a naturalist, and I loved nature, and I was immersed in it, really, being brought up. So I remember all my really kind of brilliant moments were being outdoors in nature. Not because I was being, I didn't have any friends. I did have friends, but it was just so lovely. And I think there was that kind of aura about nature in the family.
Absolutely. And I think the challenge for the people that you then go on to describe is that maybe people who don't naturally go outdoors when it's a beautiful July evening, maybe they haven't had that opportunity to experience nature as a safe place and a haven as a child. And, I'm thinking about the pocket of deprivation in which I work. And when I suggest, going out for a walk, a lot of the barriers, and you touched on some of the barriers there, are safety, it's not for folk like me, people feeling like they don't almost deserve the beauty of nature. Have you come across that in your work, William?
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on two of those things, really important things. And I'd say the number one thing is safety. And it's a feeling of, particularly in a really deprived area, you've got fantastic green space on the doorstep. And you mentioned those two most important things. First of all, they don't feel safe to be out there. It's a discomfort. It's not a kind of safety that something horrendous is going to happen. It's just an uncomfortable feeling. Much prefer to be indoors where you can hold your children close to you and feel safe, as opposed to letting your children out in a place you feel really a little bit hostile. And again, you don't feel it's your park. You don't feel it belongs to you. You think it belongs to other people. Those people over there, that's their park. That's not my park. And that is the biggest barrier. And that's why you got beautiful green spaces in places just not being used by certain groups. And when we do our Beat the Street work, which is something I might touch on later, we monitor where people have walked. We know exactly where they are. And we know how much they feel safety. And you can get one street with some people saying it's a brilliant park, we go all the time. In the same street, people saying it's a really dangerous park and we never go out there. And it's the perception that people feel. So the more you go into a more deprived area, the more people feel that hostility and that sort of unsafeness. So that's the thing we have to, it's not building more green space. Of course, we want to make it safer and well kept, etc. That's important, but that's not necessarily going to bring new people in.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said there about it's the people, it's the purpose, and it's the place. And I suppose it's a good opportunity for me to ask before we come on to some of your academic work. Should we be medicalizing nature?
So I think sometimes, because we've just said there's safety issues, I think having a doctor or nurse or whoever, healthcare professional, saying it's a good thing for you to go out and it's going to be really good for your children as well. And, I often talk about the brain development in children, which I'll mention later. And you've kind of said, look, do it. And it could just be the jolt they need to get that started, because once they've gone out there, children don't need to be told what to do. So I'm thinking of a young family here, and I know we're talking about all ages, but particularly parents who are trying to, not taking their children out. Once those children are out there, they just have a ball. They just love it. They just be. They don't have to be told what to do. They just do it. They just are. And I think that suddenly makes a parent feel much happier, but they have to have that incentive to go out. And sometimes it is that medical voice, it is that healthcare professional. So I don't think we're kind of medicalizing it. I think we're giving permission for people and giving out a little bit of comfort that it's okay to do it. So I think that's the first thing. For older people, I think it is important that we talk about it, because as we know in general practice, just one comment we make, we have no idea what the impact it has on that person's life. And it's only come a year later, they come back to you and said, doctor, you mentioned that, and that's completely changed my life. You think, well, I can't even remember saying that, and it didn't feel important at the time. But telling someone to go out to a park or green space, or do your daily walk, or do your walk, even a 10-minute walk, I tell them really slowly, is the thing that got people to start going outdoors. And they said they've not stopped, they love it, and now they bring a wife or husband, and they now bring a family. So is it medicalizing it? I suppose it is, but it's us doing our job, which is really creating conditions for the patient to be healthy, as opposed to creating the health ourselves and imposing it on the patient.
Absolutely. It's the thing I quote all the time is doing the simple things well. I think we do tend to over-medicalize and overcomplicate things. We just follow the guidelines. And as the lovely Rob Lawson said at a meeting recently, remember, guidelines are not tramlines. And I think it's really important that we, in modern healthcare and all the way through, actually, it's interesting sort of hearing you say that you started walks in your practice. We're still talking about starting walks from our practice or connecting with third sector organizations like it's a new thing, but it's not a new thing. Why does it still feel like a new thing, do you think?
Because I think we have to keep reinventing it, and sometimes that's not a bad thing, because we want to own it, a bit of permission and do it ourselves. When I set up the health walks, it gave a structure for people to be able to do it. So there were things that most walk leaders didn't want to do, was deal with the insurance, deal with the health and safety, deal with the training if something went wrong. And also, often there was no money coming in unless you monitor it and you actually take some, details. So by setting up health walks, we did all of that. And then it allowed any walk group, and there are hundreds and thousands in the country. I mean, I think we've estimated over about 5 million people have gone on health walks since it started across the country. But there are loads and loads and loads of walking groups that got nothing to do with health walks at all. But I don't think that matters. And some start and they stop and then they regenerate. But I think as long as it keeps bubbling up all the time, and there are different versions of it, I think people do sometimes say, oh, I've set up this amazing idea. And I think, well, we've been doing it for 30 years exactly now. But I don't think that matters too much. I think we are a bit daft. Sometimes we don't look around and see what other people are doing before we start doing something ourselves, because it's hard work, and you'd like to feel that you're doing something innovative. And I did as well when I started it. So it's not a problem, but I think we are sometimes a little bit blind to what has happened before. And as you say, the simple things are sometimes just overlooked because they're just too simple. And I think that's been one of the problems of walking and group walks. You look at Parkrun, high profile, it's got very good, excellent, but it's been really high profile, a bit of gadgetry because you got your code and you put it in there, and you got running and you've got volunteers. But that's running, and that's quite something, a bit more energetic, whereas walking is really, it could be seen as boring. And I think that's why it's been a problem for that to get the traction that it probably deserved.
Now, you mentioned there collecting data as one of the key things to get funding. So that maybe brings us on nicely to how you then got involved in the academic world, which is not just collecting data, it's moving to sort of a bigger scale, isn't it? Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I am a bit of I didn't know I was, because I hated stats and I hated everything to do with numbers, but I actually started looking at the data we got in. I remember one of the people working in the practice, her son was doing A-levels, and he kind of looked at the data as a project, and then we looked at it, I thought, oh gosh, that looks really amazing. We can start to see difference between men and women and when the length of walks and how they're progressing, etc. And I started collecting more and more data. I did a quick review then of the literature for the RSPB, which is a bit strange because my surname's Bird, so they commissioned a bird to do the review, and that came out in 2003 and was surprisingly effective in getting people to understand actually nature is really important. And it's when I did that review and I realized how much there was that I thought, no, I've got to really understand this, what's going on in the brain. And that's when Oxford University Press said, well, we need a book on it. I didn't have the time. I was doing general practice. I was running a company. Had young children. It was just a disaster in time ways, but it just had to be done. And sometimes in life, you just have to do when an opportunity comes up. And we published it in 2018. But the great thing was it made me connect with, I think we had 120 authors. So you connect with all of those authors around the world who are really good at really know their stuff. And those people I still remain in contact with. And that creates a sort of a big movement almost of understanding at different universities. But then, even back then, it was still small fry. Now it's huge. Pretty much every university has some aspect about nature and health. And you've got the Derbys, the Exeter universities, you've got Scotland, you've got so many universities now doing it. And it's really important that we do get that evidence. But as we know with evidence, it's only a third of the story of getting it into practice. The other part has got to be really easy for GPs to be able to do and very simple, and it doesn't have to be complicated. And then the other part, it's got to emotionally feel right. It's just got to be in their heart and gut that they think this is the right thing to do. And I think when you get all those three things, it happens. But we didn't have the evidence at the time. I don't think there's any question we don't have the evidence now. We have plenty of it.
And what do you think the key evidence is for someone who hasn't really dipped their toe into looking at the evidence behind this or any of the literature? What do you think the key messages are? What do you think we should know as GPs and practice nurses and all the rest?
I always quote the kind of studies that were done, and it is only 2 studies, but they were really done well. And they were done quite recently in Berlin, and they took people out onto a walk in the green space and they took them out into the urban environment. And they did fMRI scans immediately after and before. So when they came back from that walk and they had the scans done, it showed that the amygdala had shrunk significantly and the hippocampus had increased significantly in 60 minutes. And I think as a medic, you look at that and think, what? How can the brain change in that short time? And of course, it's blood flow that goes through it is the way it changes. And you then look at a child who's been brought up in an urban environment and think, well, if every single day their amygdala is getting more blood flow and their hippocampus is getting less blood flow, their brain is going to change shape. And we know that. We know children who have been brought up in urban environments have got a smaller hippocampus than children brought up in nature or rural. And they've obviously you have to adjust for IMD and all of the other things, social determinants and those things. But when they've done all of that and it's been replicated, that's what we're seeing. And we know that also in the prefrontal cortex that when you actually walk, your blood flow into that part, which is negative rumination, that's the bit that obviously makes our negative thoughts go round and round, which is a very evolutionary positive thing because it makes you focus on the dangerous things in your life. But of course, that gets stuck. And it's a very, very high risk factor for depression if you keep going with that. And, we talk about our heads clear. Yes, they did the scan. And what did they find? That part of the brain where the negative rumination sits actually shrank right down. And that was after another 60-minute walk. And nature seems to have a fact that we think we're safe. We feel there's food, there's water, there's shelter. Whereas in an urban environment, our brains still haven't quite got used to the fact that it's not that, it's everything but that. There's no water, there's no food, and there's no kind of restoration at all. And of course, there's lots of things in the urban environment which are telling us to bleeps going off, cars reversing, horns, all the sirens and everything else like that, saying it's not a safe place to be. And nature does it really quickly. So I think from a brain point of view, the de-stressing, which is one of the Roger Ulrich, right back when he did that amazing study with people who were recovering from gallbladder disease, looking out onto a wall compared to looking out onto the trees in the same ward, same surgeons, same nurses, same everything. But there was a reduction in pain relief required and there was a shorter stay in hospital. I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a stress reduction. Pain gets better, we know that, and therefore all the consequences. And the other thing it does, I think, which is really important to know, is yes, you can reduce that stress and change the brain. But when you do get that de-stressed, our oxytocin levels start to go back up again. So oxytocin and cortisol literally just have a kind of one's up, the other's down, the other's down, the other's goes up. Oxytocin is vital for trust. So if you've got oxytocin, you will talk to someone, you'll be much more able to be with them. But when you've got low oxytocin levels and cortisol, you actually distrust people and you push people away. So that's why nature is so good for people to connect to each other. And there's evidence in big high-rise flats where they've got nature on the bottom that people know each other from the same, 15th floor of that tower block compared to the tower block, which has just got concrete underneath where nobody knows each other. So we are seeing that evidence. I think those two things. And then, of course, Kathy Willis is a professor at Oxford, has written a book, Good Nature, and she talks about all the terpenes and all the chemicals and the biodiversity and all the gut biomes and everything else all coming through. So you've got the physical aspect of nature as well. So I think those three things, I'd say the de-stress, social connections, and then the physical stuff is what we all should know as doctors.
And then be able to explain to our patients and find out how they can then I guess engage with nature. So you mentioned some of the big projects that you've been involved in, like Beat the Street. Which is your favourite project that you have been involved in?
I think from history, the health walks probably was because that kind of got me going. And it's still around. It's called Wellbeing Walks now from the Ramblers. And I've just been to the 30th anniversary for the one locally, and there's another one in Somerset which I went to as well. So they're still going. Somerset had 28,000 people walking last year. So that health walk program in Somerset has just been going really strong. They have, I think it was 800 volunteers constantly working on it. So incredible. Beat the Street, though, I think is the one that really does excite me in the way that we are shifting a whole population. We've just been in Penzance, not huge, but we had 23% of the entire population playing. It's a quarter of the population. Every man, woman and child were playing the game, and they were engaged in getting out into nature, which they weren't doing beforehand. Families who really felt in the deprived areas, who really felt locked into their flats or houses, were able to go out because they saw thousands of other people outdoors. In Sheffield, when we did it, we had 60,000 people playing. And when you've got that number of people outdoors, suddenly, as you said before, everything becomes safe. And also, there are people like you out there. You suddenly feel you're part of the movement that's going out. So, and we've managed to do that simply by not putting it all on an app. It's on a phone, it's on a card, and we put up receivers on lampposts all around the city. And we've kept on doing that because that's what drives people. They see it, they notice it, and the children want to get to it, and the children become the marketeers. But we get 50% adults, 50% children, and huge returns on trust, on physical activity going up, well-being, life satisfaction. All of those things move up. And even after 2 years, we go back and we know that those people who took part still have that benefit. It's still hanging in there because we kick-started something. It wasn't the thing itself. It wasn't Beat the Street itself. We kick-started for people to suddenly realize they lived in a beautiful place and there was places for them to go to. And that's what I find exciting because we see that legacy move on for years afterwards, well after the game has actually gone away.
That's incredible. You must be very proud of having sort of been the enzyme that got all that going. And I guess it needs somebody who is able to pioneer something like that, isn't it? And then we all follow because we see the benefits that people can have. I suppose. What about the naysayers? How would you convince the naysayers that it is worth our time and energy to engage in these conversations with people?
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a point where this is not right for everyone. And I think there's a element there where you have to be really careful because if someone's really struggling with their health, their mental health, etc., the last thing they might want to know is go for a walk in the wood or go for a walk in the park, because that does sound so demeaning and it could sound as though we're actually just brushing them off and not caring. So I think you have to judge that conversation so well. Try and get it out from the patient themselves about, look, what would really help you? And so many patients do say, they go back to their past, they go back to their childhood, and they said, I used to love roaming around in nature. And he said, well, why don't you do it now? And then they use the excuses which you mentioned, and then you say, well, why don't we just try it? But I think there is a bit of a problem. We can lecture patients on certain things that we believe strongly in, simply because we can't quite understand why they don't get it. We get impatient, and it's not just that; it's lots of things. And I think it is that listening to the patient. Is this the right thing to say now? And has it come from them? Have they helped create that kind of conversation? So it's not. It comes naturally, as opposed to kind of diagonally coming across for conversations, saying, you've got to go onto the park, it's really good for your brain, will shrivel if you don't do it, kind of thing. So I think the naysayers can be right in many ways. You've got to be very careful and cautious how you present it without it being a fob off, without it just being, that doctor just talked about, he doesn't seem to care about me. He just talked about me going for a walk in the woods, or my gran could have told me that, So I think, so that's why I feel the evidence is so important to have in your back pocket, that you can say that, but then just wait for the right time. It may not be the right time. And nature can be quite scary for some people. In fact, can make things worse if they're not in the mood and they're not prepared for it. And then you might find actually it's going to worsen their mental health because they just get more anxious. So yes, we've got to be really careful how we use it, but doesn't say we don't use it at all, because the benefits are just huge when you see it happen.
And I love how sort of practical you are about, the importance of even, the 5-10 minute walk, because that's the beginning of something. There's a place for heroics and, wonderful people like those who do mind over mountains and take people on these huge walks. And there is a beauty to that, but it's not accessible for everyone, is it? And I guess as those on the front line, we sort of need to make sure that we're starting small but thinking big, I often say.
And just being outside, sometimes, as we know, for patients, they've got so kind of stuck indoors that even going out of that front door is a big deal. And sometimes I started not even a 5-minute walk. It's just go outside to your front door and look up and just see the sky. And there's a good evidence coming through now about how important the sky is as well, which I find really fascinating, being a bit of a weather geek as well.
Oh, yes.
But when you're looking up, you feel free, you do feel, and they realize that some of the reasons weren't actually the nature. It was because there was an open sky and people found a lot of freedom and feeling good about that. So, I think that's quite early on, that research, but I think sometimes you can just forget how cooped up and how scared patients are to make that first move. And so, yeah, out your front door, look up and see what you can see. And often you'll see birds going over, you'll see lovely clouds, might see a plane, probably see drones coming across now, but anyway, but you'll see some lovely things. And it's just that first step outdoors, which is so important.
You alluded there to your health forecasting. Tell us a bit more about that phase.
Yeah, well, I as I said, I promise I did have friends when I was young, but I was also very interested in the weather. When I used to go around to friends, I used to take my little rain gauge around when I was 10 years old, because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss the rainfall. So it was a bit sad, but anyway, it was a passion I had continually. And I knocked on the door of the Met Office when I was in general practice, because I wanted to work there. And of course, they didn't know why I would have a doctor there coming in. And I remember going to the professor of meteorology at Reading University with one of the Met Office people who was quite keen for it to happen. And he just looked at me and said, it's all witchcraft. All witchcraft, he said, health and weather. Anyway, I did get the position in the Met Office, and I did work there for a very, very happy 6 years. And we set up a health forecasting unit, which we used for the NHS, and it worked very well. We did quite a lot of research about weather and health. And it was the beginning of climate change, really getting a grip of how climate change is going to impact health as well. So it was a lot to do, but it was the first Met Office in the world that actually had a health person in there, and others have now done it, because the weather and health obviously is a much bigger issue. But that's how it got going, and I still look up in the sky. I still like the forecast, but most of it's now not kind of perhaps collecting data as I used to do. But it's certainly, I think, something we underestimate. We talk about patients. Patients tell us that before it rains, their joints get really painful, and people who say when it snows they get migraines, and we know there's a huge amount of evidence, but it's still unknown about why pain is worse in gout and phantom limb pain before it rains. All of that is unknown, and yet we've known that for about 500 years, or even Hippocrates knew about it. So it's just more of a fascination, I think. But I think when patients do say that, I think the thing I would say to them is listen carefully and agree with them, because they're right. There is evidence about it, and we don't understand it.
Oh, I could talk to you all day, but I realise that we don't have that. William, it's been absolutely lovely to begin to touch on the importance of nature and the health of the whole nation. You've touched on your work with the RSPB. You've touched on collaborating with other professionals like the weather forecasters, academics. You've touched, what was the other thing I wanted to pull on here? Oh, yes, you mentioned about the importance of biophilic buildings, essentially. Didn't use that word, but I was thinking back to a conversation at the BSLM, British Society of Lifestyle Medicine conference recently. And just to wind up, if you had a call to action to those who've decided to tune in to hear about this today, what would that call to action be?
I think, first of all, get yourself connected to nature. And some of us will be well along that path and immediately enjoy it. Others may not be, may actually don't quite get what this is about. And I think it is something one has to do in a stepwise process, but do that. I'd say just get yourself and your family. And if you've got children, absolutely, not just because it's a good thing, because it's essential for their health. Not just because of the brain development, but because of all the gut microbiome and everything else that they have to have. It is absolutely essential for a healthy child. And if we're going to get children back to this next generation in any shape or form, they have to have that connection. So that's what I'd say. Start with yourself, your family, and then obviously patients later.
Start small, start young, but get started.
Indeed.
Thank you
Perfect.
so much. Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Movement Prescription podcast, an episode of two halves on nature and health. I didn't really need convincing that nature is good for our health, but when you learn about the change in blood flow seen on functional MRIs after time in nature, and the early adopters giving critically ill patients access to outdoor wards, you can't help but feel you owe it to your patients to give permission and guidance on getting the most out of this free resource. But more than that, taking action to protect our green and blue spaces.
Hi, it's Callum. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. We are so grateful to the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine for their support in producing these podcasts, and we wholeheartedly share their vision of transforming healthcare and levelling health inequalities through lifestyle medicine. If you want to find out more, please head to bslm.org.uk. Although catering for healthcare professionals, this podcast is for everyone. If you enjoyed it, please share it. And we love hearing from you, so do reach out. Thanks for listening.